The history we are taught is a comfortable lie, a sequence of events stitched together to provide a sense of linear progression from the primitive to the sophisticated. But if you look at the stones of our greatest cities, London, St. Petersburg, New York, San Francisco, you will see a story that contradicts the textbooks. We are told that in the 1800s, men with horse-drawn carriages and primitive hand tools carved massive granite blocks and hoisted them hundreds of feet into the air to create cathedrals and state buildings of impossible precision. Yet, look at the base of these buildings. All across the globe, we see the same anomaly: basement windows that are clearly the tops of grand arches, and decorative doorways partially submerged beneath the earth. This is the evidence of the mud flood, a global cataclysm that occurred much more recently than we are led to believe, burying a high-tech civilization beneath a massive inundation of liquefied soil. Imagine a world not divided by the borders we know today, but united under a singular, global power known in ancient maps as Tartaria. This was not a mere nation, but a sprawling, technologically advanced empire that utilized the very ether of the atmosphere to provide clean, wireless energy to its citizens. The evidence of this power is hidden in plain sight. The massive domes of our historical buildings were not intended for aesthetics or religious worship, they were power plants. The ornate metal spires, the gold-leafed steeples, and the intricate ironwork on the roofs functioned as atmospheric energy collectors. This free energy was the lifeblood of the old world, a world where poverty and scarcity were unknown because the infrastructure of the planet itself provided for the needs of the many. However, something shifted. In the mid-19th century, a great darkness fell. Whether it was a natural cosmic event, a weaponized frequency attack, or a deliberate reset by a hidden hand, the result was a worldwide liquefaction of the ground. The earth turned to water, and the massive stone structures of the Tartarian Empire began to sink. Thousands of miles of terrain were covered in a thick, uniform layer of clay and silt, ranging from 6 to 20 feet deep. This was the mud flood. It wasn't a flood of water that receded, but a flood of earth that stayed, hardening into the new ground level we walk upon today. The people who survived this catastrophe were left in a state of total shock, their technology destroyed, their history literally buried beneath their feet. The aftermath of this event provided the perfect opportunity for a new group of rulers to seize control. History refers to the mid to late 1800s as a time of great pioneers and rapid industrialization, but the mud flood theory suggests this was actually a period of scavenging. The founding fathers of the modern era didn't build the great cities of the West, they found them. They arrived at these half-buried empty stone cities, dug out the first floors, and claimed them as their own. This is why we see mud-washed architecture in every corner of the world. Why would a 19th-century architect build a beautiful, ornate window half-buried in the dirt? They wouldn't. They inherited a building that was already there, but the ground level had changed. The Great Reset of the 1850s required a total erasure of what came before. To accomplish this, the new administrators of the world had to explain away the incredible architecture they could not replicate. They invented the concept of neoclassical architecture and told the public that these massive stone edifices were built in just a few years by immigrant laborers. They created the world's fairs, gigantic, temporary-looking cities that were actually the original Tartarian hubs, to showcase the old world's glory won last time before destroying them with dynamite to hide the evidence of a superior past. These fairs were psychological operations designed to convince the masses that the new world was the pinnacle of human achievement, while they literally demolished the remnants of a more advanced era. As we walk through the streets of our modern metropolises, we are walking on the roofs of a forgotten world. The subways we use were often the original ground-level transit systems of the Tartarians, repurposed by the new elite. The sewers were grand hallways. The basements were majestic ballrooms. We have been conditioned to see these things as normal, to ignore the half-windows and the impossible masonry. But the stones speak. They tell of a time when humanity was not a slave to the power grid, but a master of it. They tell of a time when architecture was harmony, and when the earth was a garden rather than a graveyard. The deeper you look into the official records of the 19th century, the more the narrative begins to crumble. We see photographs of massive cities with wide, paved streets and grand architecture, yet the streets are almost entirely empty of people. Where were the inhabitants of these magnificent places? Why are there no photos of the construction of these buildings, only photos of them already finished or being renovated? The truth is that the population had been decimated by the cataclysm, and the new settlers were simply moving into the ruins. They were repopulating an empty world, guided by a hidden hand that ensured the true origins of the buildings were never questioned. This was the birth of our current reality, a world built on top of a lie, literally and figuratively. The mud flood was the tool used to reset the clock of humanity, to strip us of our heritage and our connection to the free energy of the earth. By burying the past, the architects of the reset were able to install a new system of control based on scarcity, fossil fuels, and debt. But the mud is shifting. As more people begin to notice the architectural anomalies and the gaps in the historical timeline, the buried civilization is starting to emerge from the shadows. The Golden Age was not thousands of years ago, it was merely a few centuries ago, and its foundations are still beneath your feet, waiting to be rediscovered. The deeper we delve into the ruins of the mid-19th century, the more we realize that the global landscape is littered with structures that defy the technological capabilities of their alleged creators. To understand the scale of the deception, one must look at the star forts. Spread across every continent, from the heart of Europe to the remote islands of the Pacific and the coastlines of the Americas, these massive, geometrically perfect stone bastions are a central pillar of the mud flood evidence. Official history labels them as defensive fortifications built during the age of gunpowder, designed to deflect cannonballs. However, this explanation falls apart under scrutiny. Many of these forts are located in valleys or areas of no strategic military value, and their intricate, fractal-like designs are far more suggestive of a technological function than a defensive one. Within the framework of the Tartarian theory, these star forts were not built for war, but for harmony. Their precise mathematical layout, resembling snowflakes or cymatic patterns, indicates they were part of a global frequency network. These structures were designed to interface with the Earth's telluric currents and the atmospheric electricity that surrounds us. Just as a circuit board is designed to direct the flow of electrons, these stone complexes were designed to direct the flow of energy. When the mud flood occurred, these forts were partially submerged, their circuitry broken. Today, many have been repurposed as parks, military bases, or museums, but their true purpose as energy nodes remains hidden behind the veil of military history. As the new administrators of the world, the controllers, stepped out into the silt-covered streets of the old world, their primary mission was the sanitization of the past. This required a massive, coordinated effort to destroy or repurpose any technology that could not be easily explained away. Consider the Great Fires that decimated nearly every major city between 1840 and 1910. London, Chicago, San Francisco, Moscow, Boston, Baltimore, the list is endless. In every instance, the official story is remarkably similar. A small, accidental fire quickly spread and consumed the most magnificent stone and brick architecture ever created. But stone and brick do not burn like wood. How could a fire in Chicago melt the very iron and stone of buildings that were supposedly fireproof? The reality of these fires was likely a thermal cleaning. The controllers used these conflagrations as a method of demolition. Anything that was too advanced, anything that clearly displayed the free energy tech of the Tartarians, such as wireless lighting systems or atmospheric antennas, had to be erased. The fires provided a convenient excuse to clear away the ruins and replace them with simpler, more controllable structures. It also allowed for the destruction of libraries and city archives, ensuring that any written record of the pre-flood world was turned to ash. What the mud had buried, the fire would finalize, leaving the new population with no memory of their true origins. During this era of reconstruction, the world saw the strange phenomenon of the empty city photographs. Early daguerreotypes of cities like Paris and New York show grand boulevards and towering monuments, yet the streets are hauntingly devoid of people. Historians claim this is due to long exposure times, which caused moving people to disappear from the frame. However, this does not explain why horses and carriages, which would have been stationary at many points, are also missing. It also fails to explain why some photos do capture clear details of inanimate objects but show no signs of life in what should have been the busiest hubs of human activity. The more likely explanation is that these cities were literally empty. They were the unmud remains of a civilization that had been wiped out, captured on film before the new settlers were brought in to inhabit them. This brings us to the most chilling aspect of the Great Reset, the replacement of the population. If the original Tartarians were gone, who were the people we see in late 19th century photographs? This was the era of the orphan trains and the massive asylums. Between 1854 and 1929, an estimated 250,000 children were shipped from the east coast of the United States to the west. Official history says these were orphans of poor immigrants, but the scale and organization of this movement suggests something more systemic. These children were the blank slates. Taken from their original families, survivors of the cataclysm who were perhaps deemed unfit for the new world, these children were raised in state-run institutions and then sent out to populate the empty cities. They were told they were pioneers, that they were building a new nation, when in fact they were the janitorial crew for a fallen empire. At the same time, the controllers established massive lunatic asylums across the globe. These were often housed in the grandest, most magnificent Tartarian buildings that had survived the flood. Is it possible that these were not hospitals, but processing centers? Anyone who remembered the world before the mud, anyone who spoke of the free energy or the old empire, was labeled insane and locked away in these stone fortresses. By separating the children from the adults and silencing those who remembered the truth, the controllers were able to install a new history in a single generation. The past was not just buried in mud, it was buried in the minds of the people. The technology of the old world was not just about energy, it was about the very nature of matter. The Tartarians understood that sound, frequency, and vibration are the building blocks of reality. Their buildings were designed as resonant cavities. The massive pipe organs found in cathedrals were not originally intended to play hymns. They were frequency generators that could heal the body or maintain the structural integrity of the building through sound. When the reset occurred, the pipe organs were kept, but their true function was forgotten, replaced by religious music to distract the masses from the science of vibration. Even the antiques we cherish today are often the scavenged remains of this superior era. The intricate clocks, the mechanical automatons, and the fine jewelry of the 18th and early 19th centuries often display a level of microengineering that rivals our modern capabilities. We are told these were handmade by master craftsmen using candlelight and simple lathes, but the precision suggests automated, high-tech manufacturing. We are looking at the gadgets of a lost world, repurposed as luxury items for the new elite who had seized the Tartarian hordes. As we move into the next phase of our investigation, we must look at the geology of our world. If the mud flood was as massive as the evidence suggests, it would have left scars on the earth that go far beyond basement windows. We will examine the theory that our very mountains and canyons are not the result of millions of years of erosion, but the melted, petrified ruins of the Tartarian world. The scale of the old world was far greater than we can imagine, and the nature we see today may be nothing more than the overgrown rubble of a global city. As we peel back the layers of the official narrative, we must confront a possibility that challenges our very understanding of the natural world. If the mud flood was a result of a massive electromagnetic or plasma event, the implications for geology are profound. The theory of lithification or biological melting suggests that many of the geological features we identify as mountains, mesas, and canyons are actually the gargantuan ruins of the pre-flood world, transformed by an intense heat or chemical reaction. When we look at the Table Mountains of South Africa or the mesas of the American Southwest, we see right angles, perfectly flat plateaus, and vertical cliffs that bear a haunting resemblance to the stumps of ancient, colossal skyscrapers. In this deep narrative, the Earth we inhabit is not a wild, natural planet, but a vast, ruined city overgrown by the moss of millennia. Consider the composition of our mountains. Geologists tell us they are formed over millions of years by tectonic shifts and volcanic activity. However, many of these formations exhibit a brick-like structure when viewed from an extreme wide angle. We see sedimentary layers that are perfectly uniform in thickness, mirroring the masonry of the very Tartarian buildings we find half-buried in our cities. Is it possible that what we call rock is actually the degraded concrete and geopolymer of a previous civilization? If a global liquefaction event occurred, followed by an intense burst of atmospheric heat, the buildings of the giants would have melted, slumped, and eventually petrified into the natural landmarks we see today. The Devil's Tower in Wyoming, with its hexagonal basalt columns, bears a terrifying resemblance to the cellular structure of a giant tree or a massive architectural support beam rather than a random volcanic plug. This leads us to the concept of the Silicon Era. There is a fringe but compelling theory that the ancient world was not built of carbon-based biology alone, but of silicon. The mountains, that look like giant tree stumps, might actually be exactly that, the remains of crystalline trees that once reached miles into the sky. When these silicon forests were felled or destroyed during a previous reset, their remains petrified, forming the mountain ranges of our modern era. The mud flood of the 1800s may have been the final cleanup of this cycle, a way to submerge the smaller, stone-based ruins of the Tartarian era that existed in the shadows of these silicon giants. We are living in a world of rubble, and our modern history is a tiny, flickering candle in a vast, darkened hallway of ancient, petrified greatness. The meltology of our world explains the strange caves and tunnels found globally. Many caves do not appear to be formed by water erosion. Instead, they look like corridors where the walls have bubbled and melted. We see stalactites that look like the drippings of molten stone. If the old world was powered by a wireless energy grid that went into a state of overload or feedback during the cataclysm, the resulting heat would have been localized and intense. This would explain why one building remains perfectly intact while the one next to it is a melted ruin. The grid literally short-circuited, and the Earth, charged with immense electrical potential, reacted like a giant microwave, cooking the architecture from the inside out. The controllers, who inherited this ruined world, had to categorize these sites. They created the science of modern geology in the late 18th and early 19th centuries to provide a natural explanation for these ruins. They told us the Grand Canyon was carved by a river over eons, rather than being the site of a massive mining operation or a cataclysmic electrical scarring of the Earth. By making the timescale of the Earth millions of years long, they made the idea of a recent global civilization seem impossible. They used time as a weapon to distance us from our true heritage. If the world is billions of years old, a few buried buildings in 1850 are just architectural quirks. But if the world's timeline is much shorter and more cyclical, those buildings are a smoking gun. We must also examine the Great Wall of China and other massive earthen works. If you look at the construction of these walls, many sections are built on top of older, more sophisticated foundations. The mud flood theory suggests that many of these walls were actually the tops of buried aqueducts or power lines that spanned continents. The new settlers found these protruding from the mud and added their own crude brickwork on top, claiming they had built them for defense. This double-layered construction is found everywhere, from the pyramids of Egypt, which show signs of water and mud erosion at their base, to the star forts that have been clumsily repaired with inferior 19th-century bricks. We are a Lego civilization, building our flimsy structures on the indestructible foundations of the giants. The mining of the old world is another hidden chapter. The Industrial Revolution was not a time of new invention, but a time of massive reclamation. The new elite weren't just digging for coal and iron, they were mining the buried cities for pre-melted metals and refined materials. The Grand Canyon and the red deserts of the world show the telltale signs of open-pit mining on a planetary scale. These were the quarries of the Tartarians, or perhaps the excavation sites of the controllers as they hunted for lost technology. The red color of these landscapes often comes from iron oxide, the rusted remains of a world that was once made of steel and glass, now ground into dust and silt. The narrative of global warming or climate change also takes on a different light in this context. If the Earth's atmosphere was once a pressurized, high-oxygen environment that allowed for the growth of giants and the transmission of wireless energy, then the reset was also an atmospheric one. The flood changed the air we breathe. We are living in the thin air of a post-cataclysmic world, which is why we are smaller, weaker, and more prone to disease than the ancients. The domes of the old world were not just for power. They were life support chambers that maintained the old atmospheric pressure for the elite. As we walk through the national parks of the world, we are told to leave no trace and to admire the pristine wilderness. But what if these parks were designated as such to prevent us from looking too closely at the ruins? By labeling a site a natural wonder, the controllers ensure that no one will ever try to excavate it to see if there is a city buried beneath the rock. The wilderness is a shroud. The forests are the overgrowth covering the bones of our ancestors' cities. We are being kept in a simulation of a natural planet, while the truth of our artificial, constructed, and destroyed environment remains hidden in plain sight. The final piece of this geological puzzle is the Ice Ages. Official history uses the Ice Ages to explain the massive movement of earth and boulders across continents. But a mud flood, a slurry of liquefied earth moving at high speeds, would produce the exact same results in a fraction of the time. The glacial erratics, large boulders found in random places, were not moved by ice, but by the force of a liquefied earth tide. The reset was a messy, violent, and swift affair. And as we move into the next part of our journey, We will look at how this event was encoded into our myths, our religions, and the very language we use, hidden from the conscious mind but ever present in our subconscious. To understand how a civilization of such immense scale could be erased, one must look beyond physical silt and into the unseen realms of frequency and vibration. The pre-flood world, the realm of Tartaria, was not merely a collection of nations, but a unified global grid. This grid was biological, architectural, and celestial. The great cathedrals, the obelisks, and the star forts were the hardware of a planet-sized machine that utilized the ionosphere as a power source. This is the secret of the Golden Age. When the Great Reset occurred in the 1800s, it wasn't just a physical burial, it was a frequency hijack. The controllers understood that to rule the survivors of the mud flood, they had to disconnect them from the Earth's natural resonance and plug them into a new, artificial system of scarcity and control. Look at the cathedrals that survived the inundation. The word itself, cathedra, relates to a seat of power, but in a technical sense, these were acoustic resonators. The massive stained glass windows were not just art, they were frequency filters, often designed with patterns that match cymatic vibrations, the shapes that sound makes in physical matter. The pipe organs, with their massive lead and silver pipes, were designed to bathe the population in healing frequencies that kept the human DNA in a state of high repair and extended longevity. This is why the ancients lived for hundreds of years in our myths. They weren't myths, they were the biological reality of living within a harmonic grid. After the mud settled, the new elite repurposed these structures. They stripped the tech from the spires, replaced the healing frequencies with dogmatic hymns, and turned the power plants into houses of worship to a distant, demanding god. The mud flood itself may have been triggered by a manipulation of this very grid. If you vibrate a container of sand at a specific frequency, the sand will begin to act like a liquid. This is acoustic liquefaction. The theory suggests that the controllers used the Tartarians' own energy network against them. By sending a discordant reset frequency through the obelisks and power stations, they turned the ground beneath the cities into a fluid state for a matter of minutes. In that window of time, the heavy stone buildings sank, and the surrounding countryside, now a slurry of mud, rushed in to fill the voids. This explains why the mud is so uniform across the globe. It wasn't rain, it was the earth itself rising and falling like a tide, triggered by a weaponized resonance. Following the cataclysm, the parasitic class began the process of historical engineering. This is where the 1800s become a surreal landscape of contradictions. We see the great exhibitions and world's fairs being constructed in record time. These fairs, like the 1893 Chicago World's Fair, featured massive electric cities at a time when most people were still using candles. The official story is that these were temporary structures made of staff, a mix of plaster and hemp fiber. But photos show massive, deep-set foundations and intricate masonry that would take decades to build. The truth is far more sinister. These were the original unburied hubs of the Tartarian civilization. The fairs were a way for the new elite to display the captured technology and architecture to the orphan-trained generation before destroying it. It was a closing down sale for a civilization. After the fairs ended, these magnificent white cities were dynamited and burned. Why destroy such beauty? Because they couldn't be explained. You cannot tell a population they are primitive pioneers if they are living in the shadow of 200-foot-tall marble palaces that glow with wireless light. The demolition was a psychological necessity. The controllers had to erase the evidence of free energy to make way for the combustion engine and the power meter. They traded the infinite energy of the atmosphere for the finite energy of oil and coal, turning a sovereign humanity into a dependent workforce. The smokestacks of the Industrial Revolution were the tombstones of the Tartarian age. This brings us to the grand deception of the 19th century timeline. To fill the gap left by the vanished Tartarians, historians invented a series of wars and revolutions. The Napoleonic Wars, the American Civil War, and the Crimean War all served a dual purpose. First, they provided a cover for the destruction of old-world infrastructure. If a city was destroyed by war, no one would ask why its buildings looked like they had melted or sunk into the mud. Second, these wars served to cull the remaining adults who remembered the old world. By sending the old blood to die on the battlefield, the controllers ensured that only the new orphans remained to inherit the fabricated history. The reddening of our history is also seen in the literal sense. Why are so many of the old world buildings made of red brick? Red brick is not just a building material. It is a composition of iron-rich clay that has been fired. In the Tartarian grid, these bricks acted as semiconductors, holding and moving the charge collected by the steeples and domes. When we see ruins of red brick cities across the Americas and Europe, we are looking at the remains of a global motherboard. The mud flood silt that buried these cities was often the same material, clay, suggesting that the mud may have been a demagnetized version of the very bricks the cities were built from. A literal return to dust. Even the language we use is a remnant of this reset. Why do we call the ground floor of a building the first floor in some countries, but the basement in others? Why is real estate named after royal estate? It is because the new royals claimed the physical remains of the previous world. The very word history is his story, the narrative of the winner. We speak in a tongue designed to obscure the reality of the reset. We call the grand stone structures classical, a term that suggests they belong to a distant, unreachable past, rather than a world that was functioning just 200 years ago. As we look at the maps from the 1500s and 1600s, we see Tartaria clearly marked as the largest empire on Earth. By the late 1800s, it has vanished from the maps entirely, replaced by Russia, China, and the British Empire. This was not a slow decline, it was a delete operation. The world we live in is a partitioned version of the original. We are kept in national silos to prevent us from realizing that the architecture of a post office in Buenos Aires is identical to a library in Calcutta and a courthouse in Virginia. They all belonged to the same unified, global system. In the next and final part of this narrative, we will explore the modern echoes of the mud flood. We will look at the hidden technology that still operates today, the signs that another reset may be approaching, and how the individual can begin to deprogram themselves from the 1850 illusion. The mud is not just in the ground, it is in our minds. But as the red fire of truth rises, the silt is beginning to dry and crack, revealing the golden spires of our true heritage once again. We are not the pinnacle of progress. We are the survivors of a fall, and it is time to remember who we were before the earth rose to swallow us whole. We stand at the edge of a forgotten horizon, looking back through a haze of manufactured shadows. The evidence of the mud flood and the Tartarian Empire is not merely a collection of architectural anomalies. It is a profound testament to the fragility of human memory and the ruthless efficiency of those who curate our reality. The final layer of this mystery lies in the modern echo, the realization that the mechanisms used to bury the old world in the 19th century are still active today, quietly preparing the stage for the next cycle of erasure. We are living in the inter-reset period, a brief window of awareness before the silt rises once more. To see the present clearly, we must look at our modern infrastructure through the lens of the scavenger. Our current power grid, the tangled web of wires, coal-fired plants, and nuclear reactors, is a crude, parasitic imitation of the elegant, wireless system of the past. We are told that Tesla was a lone genius who invented the concept of wireless power, but the mud flood theory suggests he was simply a man who had found the manuals of the old world. He wasn't inventing, he was remembering. His Wardenclyffe Tower was a modern attempt to rebuild a Tartarian power node. When the controllers realized he was close to reactivating the global grid, they withdrew his funding and burned his papers. The elite do not want us to have free energy, not because it is impossible, but because it is the ultimate tool of liberation. A population that does not need to pay for light and heat is a population that cannot be controlled. The Silicon Valley of our era is another echo. We are led to believe that we are the first to develop smart technology, yet the star forts and cathedrals were the original smart cities. They were built with integrated circuitry made of stone, water, and precious metals. The Internet we use today is a digital version of the etheric network the Tartarians used to communicate and share knowledge. The difference is that our network is a closed loop designed for surveillance, whereas theirs was an open field designed for expansion. We are being steered toward a digital mud flood, a total saturation of the mind with artificial information designed to bury our intuition just as the physical mud buried our cities. If the 1850s reset was achieved through liquefaction and fire, how will the next one manifest? We see the signs in the Smart City initiatives and the push for 15-minute cities. These are the new star forts, centralized hubs where the population can be monitored and, if necessary, reset with the flip of a frequency switch. The Great Reset is a term now used openly by global organizations, a bold admission of the cyclical nature of their control. They are no longer hiding the delete button, they are simply rebranding it as progress. They are preparing the new orphan generation, raising children in a world of screens and virtual realities where the physical evidence of the past no longer matters. However, the reddish fire of the old world still burns in our collective DNA. This is the Great Awakening, the moment the survivors realize they are living in a ruin. Every time a researcher identifies a buried window, every time an explorer finds a melted mountain, the frequency of the lie is weakened. The controllers rely on our unseeing, our willingness to accept the basement window as a normal architectural choice. But once you see the mud, you can never unsee it. The world transforms from a random collection of nations into a unified crime scene, and the experts of academia transform into the guards of the prison. The lore of the underground also takes on a new urgency in our final hour. Across the globe, massive tunnel boring machines are working in silence, creating vast subterranean cities for the modern elite. Why are they building downward? Perhaps because they know the cycle is turning. They know that when the atmospheric electricity reaches its peak, the surface of the Earth will once again become a place of fire and silt. They are preparing to become the ancients of the next cycle, the gods, who will emerge from the ground to guide the next batch of orphans through the ruins of our steel and glass skyscrapers. We are the Tartarians of tomorrow, and our great works will be the basement mysteries of the year 2300. What then is the individual to do? The answer lies in frequency sovereignty. If the mud flood was triggered by a discordant vibration, then the resistance must be harmonic. We must disconnect from the reset frequencies of the modern world, the constant fear, the digital noise, and the artificial scarcity. We must return to the resonance of the earth. The Tartarian buildings were designed to vibrate in sympathy with the human heart. By seeking out these sites, by studying the cymatic patterns of the old world, and by refusing to accept the silt of history, we begin to rebuild the global grid within ourselves. We are not small. We are the descendants of giants. We are not primitive. We are the heirs of a global civilization that mastered the stars and the earth. The mud flood was a tragedy, but it was also a testament to the indestructible nature of the human spirit. They buried us, but they forgot we were seeds. Even now, beneath the concrete and the clay, the golden spires are waiting. The red fire is not just the light of destruction, it is the light of the forge, the heat required to melt the chains of the 1850 illusion. As we conclude this deep narrative, look around your own city. Look at the old post office, the historic courthouse, and the ancient church. Look at the ground level. Notice the stairs that lead up to the first floor, and the windows that peer out from the dirt. You are looking at the roof of a world that refused to die. You are looking at the evidence of a global family that was separated by mud but remains united in stone. The great civilization was not buried alive. It was placed in a stasis, waiting for a generation with the courage to pick up the shovel and the frequency to wake the earth. The story of the mud flood is the story of our future as much as our past. It is a warning and a promise. The warning is that history can be deleted in a single lifetime. The promise is that the truth is lithic. It is written in stone, and stone does not forget. We are the excavators of the soul. We are the ones who will wash away the silt. And when the last of the mud is cleared, we will not find a new world, we will find the one we never truly left. The horizon is glowing crimson, the fire of the old world is rising, and the burial is finally coming to an end. We are the giants returning to our halls. We are the light returning to the dome. The reset is over. The remembrance has begun.